Okay, so maybe I should just say a few words.
Small introduction.
To like introduce everybody. And convenient to prepare a few slides, right? So, of course, it's like a cooking show, you know? It's like, meanwhile, let's see. Click.
Button for full screen.
Yeah, there's gotta be a button for something. Oops. So, there we go. One way or the other, it's gonna work. So, seen this before, you know who this is? I don't.
I love the Oracle stock photos.
Yeah, I love them too, like they're awesome. You know, thanks a lot to the team behind them, because I was able to find all these wonderful pictures of people riding trains, looking through a microscope, just great. Okay, so Uwe, here, works on Apache Lucene and does amazing things in his real life, but also works on Apache Lucene and does amazing things there. I think you're the chair, right?
No, I was chair for 1 year, but it's changing every year. But I'm in the project management committee. Okay. Yeah.
So if you have, Lucene problems, he's the guy to go to, I guess.
You're chair.
I'm chair. Yes.
Robert is the Apache Maven chair. So if you want to know about the plight of an Apache chair, he is the guy to ask, I guess. But then I guess, Maven is probably even more interesting to most people, because I think most of you use Maven, right? Maven? Okay.
Well done.
Yeah.
Gradle?
Sure.
Okay.
Great.
Ant? Okay. Make? Old school, make. Yeah, great.
Make, yeah.
So,
but I'm not.
This is also a world representation, I think.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
But I will not talk about Lucene here, so don't be afraid anything. So you can ask me anything about internals of JDK.
Exactly, and you know me anyway by now, so that's fine. Why are the two of us together? So a long time ago, in the time frame of Java 7, Java 8, well, in Java 7 we realized we released JDK 7, and some people didn't know about it. We didn't have a launch event like now, right? So that was a problem, I guess. But also, a lot of people didn't get to test it and tell us about bugs they found in time for us to fix them. So when we heard bug reports about 7 being really nasty to Apache Lucene, in particular in Solar, we realized, whoops, that's bad, and we fixed it, great. But then we realized we should probably do something to reach out to all these projects out there that do interesting, great things on top of the JVM, and try to ask them to maybe test the next JDK earlier. So for Java 8, JDK 8, we started to approach Maven, Lucene, Ant, Gradle, and all these guys, and to ask them politely if they would be interested in maybe testing JDK 8 ahead of time. And lo and behold, they said, yes, of course, sure, why not? Let's try, let's see what happens. And what happened was that we got a lot of great bug reports from Lucene, from Maven, from Groovy, Scala, and these guys that helped us make 8 a much more, pleasant release out of the box. And so developers and users moved on to 8 relatively quickly. So that was good. And then, of course, based on experience, we went further and approached more projects. So we asked Eclipse projects, Apache projects, other languages on top of the JVM, the Wildfly guys, the testing tools and so forth, if they would care to maybe test something too. And they did, and they gave us great bugs. Well, we gave them bugs, which they told us about. We fixed them. There is about 100 projects now that are registered as part of this Open JDK quality outreach effort. And you can join too with your open source projects. Let me know, or jump on this mailing list, quality discuss at Open JDK. It's fairly easy. You get pinged by Rory, a colleague of mine, every 2-3 weeks. He'll tell people what's new in the JDK that week or so, what features are relevant to them, which bugs they have reported we have fixed meanwhile, so we can evaluate the changes. And as part of that, we've been reaching out to a number of projects who then, in turn, have been able to, I guess, more rapidly adopt and adjust to the changes in JDK, whether that's a Log4j saying, the 1 series is just too broken to fix, so we'll end of life it and please move on to 2, and you should move to Log4j 2 anyway. To other projects like, Obgenesis or mostly from Apache, really. Like the Apache community has been just awesome around this. So the Maven team, for example, around Robert, has been awesome about testing and reporting issues to us. And I think you've almost single-handedly dragged Maven through JDK 9 early access builds and made sure that the various features we've implemented through Jigsaw actually were validated in Maven and that we got the feedback we needed to make them really work well. So thank you very much for that. And of course, Uwe has been also awesome in terms of testing the VM changes, which there were quite a few in 9. For example, we changed the default garbage collector to G1. Yay! And letting us know about things that don't quite work as well as we thought they would. Very quickly too, because I think you have this awesome setup for regression testing that very few projects have replicated. So whenever Rory would email, Uwe and say, hey, a new JDK build is out, like 15, 20 minutes later, you get an email from Uwe saying, it's fine, okay, it passed, it's good, carry on. Or you get an email saying, yeah, do we have a few things you want to look at more closely? We'll let you in a few days. And you're like, oh no, what is it now?
It doesn't even compile.
What is it now? What have we done? And you go through, the change logs, you're like, what could it be? So that was really good and exciting. And as part of that, we thought at Jack's conference this year, we should get together and maybe chat with Remy Forex, who isn't here today, unfortunately, about their experiences in practice, adjusting, major projects on build space, library space to make them work with 9, and getting questions from the audience, maybe interested in going through the same pain themselves, or maybe seeing themselves facing other challenges, to hear from them, what they had to do and how well it went. And I think this was a really fun session we had. So the feedback was really great from the audience, and we thought let's do this again. Like let's do this, more often, like now. So 4 months later, how are things today? Do your project still work on 9? Sure.
No problem.
Okay, we're done here.
Yeah. Yesterday we released Apache Lucene and Solar version 7, and it's official in the release announcement that it's compatible with Java 9. Of course, the previous releases were also compatible, but now it's officially announced. So,
Great. From day one.
We just took the opportunity because it was so close together.
Yep.
We didn't want to announce it today, so.
So you beat us by a day, right? Very good. And what about the Maven system?
Well, I think the hard part about Maven is that it's not just one project. I think it's around 80 projects, probably. Most of them are, of course, plugins, but we have Maven Core, and that one is compatible with Java 9 from the beginning. So, in fact, Maven 3.0 already runs fine on Java 9, no problem there. The most interesting part is, of course, the compiling of Java 9 projects. So, does it understand the module info file, and does it recognize these extra arguments? So, I think a month ago we did a final release of the Maven compiler plugin, which is based on the latest Java 9 version. I think it was 1.8.1 probably. So the most stable version, and I think it's running fine. So Karl Heinz is here as well. He's also a Maven committer, and together we did release a lot of plugins last month just to make them compatible with Java 9. And it's all looking good. So as far as I know, every project runs fine with Java 9.
Great. Thank you very much for the hard work you put in. But of course, I mean, it can't have been all, roses and so forth. So
Well, let's start by day one. The first release of the Jigsaw Early Access. Every Maven project couldn't compile. Every Maven project couldn't compile. And that was actually one of the bugs in Java 9, which they actually fixed within 2 days, I think, and they did a new release. And so also there, great work from Oracle that they were able to fix it that fast. Of course, it was us telling them that we could point where the actually issue was. It has to do with class loaders, of course, as usual. And they were able to reproduce it and fix it. And it was great.
And did you have a favorite issue in 9?
In 9, Yeah, of course. I think this time, in contrast to Java 7 and Java 8, it was not much in the hotspot area, so miscompiled, misoptimized code. That was not really the problem. We had a lot of issues, not really in Apache Lucene on its own, but more in Apache Solr, and that was mainly in third-party libraries, as you said before. And the famous issue was, of course, the new version numbers. So, you know, there was some code somewhere that has a static initializer without an exception handling, without any checks, which was doing a string index of point, looking for the first part of the version number. And of course, with Java 9, this did not work anymore because the EA releases did not even had a point in the version number. And then it was crashing with an array index out of bounds exception. So I think that happened with a lot of projects, and in that case it was an Apache project and also fixed quite fast. But the other issues were, of course, all stuff around accessing private APIs, like unsafe, but we removed every instance of using unsafe from Apache Lucene already. It's no longer needed because Optimizer is so good. And we only accessing in Apache Lucene one single place where we need internal APIs. That has something to do with unmapping memory map files, but I hope this should be fixed in Java 10, maybe. But for that, that's the only thing. But so in general, it was quite easy to convert all the code, so most of the code was working. And to come up on top of Maven, I can say Apache Ant is working even in the oldest version with Java 9.
Okay, I have to say I haven't even checked 2.1 and early versions of Maven because everybody should use at least Maven 3. So.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, how much work, like, what kind of work was you had to do? You know, you said you had to update your dependencies.
Yes, some dependencies you have to upgrade, you have to check. We did some check because you said a lot of those APIs are using internal stuff, and J-Link is not really helping because they are doing that with reflection and all that stuff. So what we did was we are running all the tests inside the security manager. When we are compiling and testing Lucene, everything is run in the security manager, which forbids everything, including reflection. So, and because of that, we are quite sure that nothing in the dependent libraries is trying to access it, or if it accesses something, it falls back to something that works. And that was quite good. And we are also scanning our own code for some APIs we don't want to access in the code. So if somebody commits anything that uses something we don't want to have in our code, so like accessing, opening a file without giving a character set, which is an example not having anything to do with Java 9, but this fails the build already on our side.
Nobody would ever do that, right?
Yeah, and of course not. But that's something. So in that case, we are checking from the beginning. And then, of course, whenever a new Java 9 build came out, we were testing that. And we also found some bugs around that. Yeah.
Just a question about the testing setup. If you test for a new Java version, is the test setup different from just standard tests when you run a build? Do you test different things or additional things?
That's a little bit, maybe it's a little bit complicated to explain, because the Lucene and Solr tests, we have of course a lot of classical unit tests, but there, for example in Solr, there are also more integration tests inside. And the special thing is, and this is how we found a lot of bugs also in the earlier optimizations of hotspot, is that most of the tests in Lucene are not something like static tests. We are testing against random data, which so when the test starts, it initializes some included random number generator with a fixed seed. that's known. So when the test fails, you can repeat the same stuff. So we are testing all the time with different data, and we are also exchanging components. So for example, sometimes we are analyzing the test in a different way. If we are just testing the indexer of Apache Lucene, it doesn't matter how the text is tokenized. So you can test a lot of different workloads. And basically, when we exchange the JVM, we have a Jenkins machine that on every Jenkins run, it chooses a different setting. So it chooses a 32-bit JVM, a 64-bit JVM. Sometimes it uses one garbage collector, another garbage collector. So in every run, the tests are not running on every commit. They are running all the time, day and night. We are testing that with different settings, and based on that, you find especially those bugs if you have wrongly optimized code in the JVM, you find that quite fast. Of course, sometimes you hit a bug in your own code. You think, oh fuck, how can that happen? But that's interesting. You sometimes hit corner cases.
I think from our perspective, this explains why these kind of efforts are so valuable for JVM team, because of course we could run those tests in-house in some form or the other, but then you do need to have domain expertise in those projects to be able to discern if this is, say, an issue with setting up the test environment, as you said, if this is an issue in the code that changed in the project, or if it's really an issue in the JDK itself. And by being able to directly collaborate with lead developers of those projects, we get great feedback on real issues. And that in turn also means that our teams then can then prioritize them accordingly and provide useful feedback back.
But there are some test setup specific stuff. So for example, if we are checking JDK 9, we are always passing the special flag to deny illegal accesses. For example, that's something.
That's something interesting, but I think the most interesting point is that you run the JVM with different settings every time.
Yeah.
That's actually quite a new level.
Yeah, so I think that's done by a more or less simple Groovy script running in the Jenkins before the main build starts, and it just sets some environment variables that are passed to the build system, and then setup is quite good. But in that case, you have to run your tests all the time, so it's not triggered by. We are also testing different operating systems. So there is Windows testing, which is in the case of Lucene very important because file system semantics are completely different. You cannot delete a file when it's still open and all that stuff. We are also testing macOS, but that's not really funny because on macOS it's almost the same like on Linux, I think. And we are also testing Solaris, Open Solaris. But the main issues we see from the Windows machine and the Linux part, so it's something like 20 different types of setups you can run your tests in if you cycle through all of them. So garbage collector changes.
So yes, we are also running with different operating systems, but not long-running builds, of course. I hope Maven is done with in a couple of minutes. Otherwise, you have a huge project.
I think it takes, depending on the machine type, for us 1 hour.
Well, I know there was this project related to Java FX, I think, from Christopher Dutz. You know him? And his project was based on Ant build. And they had a couple of issues because they didn't get contributions because the project was too complex and it took too long. So from a 2-hour build with Ant, they reduced it with Maven to, I think, half an hour. So that was really impressive. I was even impressed. So, yeah.
Yeah, the problem is if your dependencies in Ant, it's hell.
Yes, and
because you have to always dive into the build files, then execute all of them again, and you cannot cache anything. And
it was doing things over and over.
Yeah, exactly. We did not yet switch to something else. So Lucene and Solar still aren't. But there are plans to move to...
This is a hint, right?
Yeah. No, but we are currently... The problem is Maven is, for a lot of stuff we are doing, I told him yesterday, when we are now with a 7.1 version, we will also have modular, some some jar file that contains code solely for Java 9. That's a multi-release jar, and for that we need to do some patching of the class files, and for all that stuff that's not really easy possible without writing a plugin in Maven. So in our ARN build it's Groovy at the moment that does that stuff, so it looks like we will maybe move to Gradle. But at the moment, Gradle is not the best idea with Java 9, I think. Is anybody using Gradle at the moment with Java 9? So now it works because of the big kill switch was disabled. Because before it was not even possible to start Gradle at some points. I know that from the Elasticsearch people, they're doing that stuff, and they have a lot of hacks in the Gradle build on the setup to get it running at least.
Yep, I mean, some projects are, one thing we discovered when we started doing this is that some problems are kind of very generally spread out. So, for example, a lot of the projects we got in touch with for the first time and asked them to test with 9, they would try to build a project with it, and that would work, awesome. And they were running a test, and the test would fail catastrophically. They would tell us, everything is broken, what have you done? And we'll look at, what it would send us, say, how exactly do you compile your project, please? And they would say, well, we use source and target, like you always do. Okay, and did you maybe specify like the API you were compiling against? No. So for example, that was a classic problem because a lot of people would forget that that's not sufficient to just give source and target parameters to Java-C. You also have, if you're compiling for a lower JDK version, let the compiler know which class library API you're compiling against. And based on that experience and the feedback we got from Maven team, there's actually a feature now in JDK 9 that lets you specify the release you're cross-compiling against, and it makes it much easier, so you cannot forget it anymore.
We have done that now also in the build. So when it detects that it's Java 9, it specifies release instead of source and target. But the problem is Java 8 does not understand that, so you need something like an if switch in your build tool to do that, which is unfortunately a little bit not so good. That if you're compiling against an older one, that you need something like a switch when invoking the compiler. Is there something that Maven can do about this automatically?
Yes, no problem. It's
okay.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's called a JDK activation profile.
No. But I mean, if you solely use Java 9 and you want to pass release, but in your POM file you only have source and target specified, is there something that can?
You don't use that?
No, we don't have.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's called Animal Sniffer, and what Animal Sniffer has, it has signatures of every Java runtime. So if you, for instance, have Java 8 runtime, want to compile code which can only run with Java 6 because you have a very old WebSphere server, you can specify the Animal Sniffer with a Java 6 signature. And what it does, it just goes over every class and method just to do a match if it is available in that type of Java. So if you are on Java 9, please start using this release tag. If you are before, please use the Animal Sniffer.
Yeah, but there's no support for the release tag at the moment. In the plugin that you can dynamically enable it only if you are having Java 9. Okay, because that was the idea we are doing. Of course, with the Animal Sniffer we are doing, we don't use that one at the moment, but in general we require the release manager of the project at least to run it with the correct JDK.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So, there was a question over there.
For Robert,
Yes.
you wrote a very interesting article on SitePoint, why Maven cannot generate module info.
Yes.
Did something change in the meantime?
No. That's a short answer. But why? But why? Okay, so I hope you're all aware of the module info file, and there's an overlap if you're talking about dependencies, because you specify in your POM file the dependencies, but you also have to specify them as requirements in your module info file. And the question always returning, also here, well done, is can't you just generate that file? And for probably 80%, if we're only talking about those dependencies, yes, that is possible. But there is more in that file. For instance, you have to specify which packages are exported. You have to specify the module name. You have to specify if it is open or not. You can specify the services. So there's a lot of information more. Sorry?
You can put annotations on the module.
Yes, but so there are a lot of things that are added to that module info file besides the dependencies. And there are also modules which are not dependencies. So for instance, if you want to use Java logging, it is a module, so you have to specify it in your module info file, but it is not a dependency. So that's a part of the 20% you cannot solve with Maven. So I'm pretty sure there will be an open source project which will do something like this and say we can generate it, but it is only for that small part and for his own project probably. But
can Maven validate it maybe?
Validate is possible, yes. That should be possible. But the question is always, why do I have to specify it here and there? So.
But validating, I think, is not really needed because the compiler is doing that.
Yes.
Yeah, it could tell you if you have too many dependencies.
There's
okay.
also that's also an issue. Why we said who's running dependency analyze Go often? Nobody.
You should run it.
Okay.
What does it do?
Okay. What does it do? It tells you if it has unused but specified dependencies and the other way around. So I'm pretty sure that most of the people are only adding dependencies and never removing them. Probably.
Well, the build could break.
Yes, sure, no problem. Just add another dependency to it. But that also means that those requirements will only grow and grow and grow. And right now, if you have a project with dependencies, you can say, well, I want to exclude specific dependencies. That is not possible with required modules. If they are mentioned there, they are really required. That's what the word is saying. So that's also one of the reasons why I don't want to generate such a plugin to generate the module info file. I will add that to the blog. I suddenly thought about it. Yes? Other questions? Who's going to use Java 9 tomorrow? Or next week or next month? Who is going to try to convert old projects to, yes, okay. That's nice. Okay.
Interesting.
Interesting, but watch out, no. Be aware that not every old Java project can be transferred to a Java 9 project. For instance, Maven itself cannot become a modular project in its current state because we have one jar, which is our ash tray, something like a bin tray. And if we have classes we don't want to use anymore, we put it in the compat jar. That means that we have packages in different jars. And one of the new rules with Java 9 is that you cannot have this split package issue. So this is one example that not every project from Java 6 or 7 can be transferred to 9. And that's not a problem because the class path will stay there forever. So it is only if you start a new project, like Tricia told us, if you start a new project, you are aware of the new Java 9 rules about the split packages and etc. Don't put classes in the root of your jar. That's also not allowed anymore. If you know those rules and accept those, then it's fine to start with Java 9. And otherwise, just stay on Java 8 and on the class path.
But there's still the possibility, so that's there's also the question, so in Apache Lucene it's exactly the same problem. So we have something like pluggable codecs and they use package private APIs across the jar files, and to refactor that it would take, I think, 2 years, something like that. Yeah, maybe not so much. So, but in general, if you know that you, for example, want to ship an application, and you want to create a J-Link, a smaller JDK using J-Link for that. The easiest on that is simple, build your whole Maven project, create an Uber char out of it, and then specify a module info for it, where you specify all the modules that you're using from the JDK, and then let the J-Link tool run on it, and it will create a smaller JDK with your project, all your dependencies as one big module, and all the modules you need from the JDK. That's one possibility that you can do.
And in fact, JDEVs will actually create like a rough module info file based on your dependencies if you pass it the right flag, which is in the man pages, so don't worry.
Okay.
There's documentation to read.
But it is based on compiled classes.
Exactly.
So if Maven wants to generate that up front, it first has to compile those classes, then use JDEPs to generate that, well, rough version. So again, not perfect. Cool.
So I guess, well, actually,
Kind of supporting Maven for running tests, because I understand you don't want to test dependencies in the module info file, so you have to specify a lot of exports and open stuff and nothing.
No, in fact, that's also interesting stuff. If you take a look at a lot of examples which are using Java 9, you see that most of them have a source folder, and then they have the module name, and then they have their packages. That's not the way Maven is going to handle it. In Maven, you can just keep your folder structure as it is. So just source main Java, put your module info file in the root of that folder, and just compile as you are used to. Also, you don't have to change your dependencies. You don't have to specify this jar belongs to the module path or on the class path. That will do Maven for you. Running tests, we still think that it's not really interesting to add a module info file to your test sources because it is never being distributed.
I think you're not even allowed
No.
to. You cannot have two module info files.
Well,
Yeah, the problem is you have a split package problem
Yes.
with the tests.
Yeah, but then if you want to have whatever, Mockito JUnit in your module path,
Yes.
then you have to specify it on the command line.
true.
So I thought maybe Maven has
Well,
some plan
Maven-
for
well, Maven does-
figuring it out automatically, so it's not in the module info. Then
We do some tricks to be able to compile. It's already an issue during compilation, so we have to add a patch module, I think. Yes. So we add a patch module, so both sources can be merged actually. And when running the tests, there's right now a branch of Surefire, which will hopefully be released soon, which will actually use the module path. So right now it is still using the class path. But there's a branch ready which is actually using the module path. With a lot of flags and magic and fingers crossed.
right, I mean, speaking of using module path, I mean, that's a 9 feature. Are you guys using something from 9 already or finding it useful for your projects?
No, because Maven itself still, we require Java 7. So
Yeah. On our side, yes. Actually, two things. I'm also working together with the Elasticsearch people, which is built on top of Lucene. And I was one of the authors of the scripting engine, which is included in Elasticsearch, which is called Painless, which was created because Groovy was too unsafe, because you cannot really, and it's also too slow because it's really a scripting language where you can do everything, and for running, executing queries, it needs to be fast. So the code must be compiled to real bytecode, it must be statically typed, but it's still using invoke dynamic for the not statically typed. And all that stuff. And one feature, for example, we are using, if it detects Elasticsearch already, the version, I think, since 5.0, if you execute it in Java 9, it will detect by a lookup of the method handle that there's a string concat factory and it's related to the strings. And there's a new feature in Java 9 when you compile code for Java 9 and you are appending strings in your code, like string plus an integer plus something else, in the previous versions it was using a string builder and appending all the stuff to it. And of course this has some performance problems because you don't know how long the string is before everything. And so with code compiled for Java 9 it uses invoke dynamic to do that. So it uses string concat factory, and Elasticsearch scripting engine, when it creates a bytecode, it will already use the string concat factory and it will create a bytecode load like that. And for Lucene, we are now starting to use the new features for checking indexes and copying arrays and comparing arrays in the Java util objects, and we are doing that with a multi-release jar now. But this will come. It's not yet released, but maybe in 7.1. So we are already moving in that direction, but no module support at the moment.
And multi-release jars are a feature in 9 that lets you basically have classes that are only used under 9 to implement functionality, while the rest of your code can remain as it is for 8. So that you can, for example, if you were using one of those, sun, mist, don't touch these methods, which then got removed, then you can still have the bytecode using it for 8, but then leverage the replacement methods in 9 in a separate class file that's only used under 9. So that lets you then migrate those projects towards new APIs without having to choose and abandon your users who are probably still on 7 or 8.
In fact, the module info file as a Java 9 file can exist next to Java 8 files or 7 files. Or because it has a dash inside of it, it will be ignored by the JVM.
And so that means you can ship a jar file that's a module under 9, but
classic jar
under 8.
Under 8.
Also means you don't get the benefits, of course, of strong encapsulation under 8, but got to start somewhere.
So have a look at the Maven compiler plugin page, and there's an example how you can do that. You have to do 2 compilations, one for the module info file with actually all the classes just to ensure that it works, and then again for the rest of the classes with a lower version of Java.
Couldn't the plugin do that automatically, compile everything except the module info with the old release? Or you don't have to
Right one.
Right one. No.
Yeah.
Well, you have to. Most often, you have a low runtime of Java. So in this case, what we did is have a toolchain specify that it is using Java 9. In this case, it's another version for the rest of the classes.
Yeah.
And we also want to make to keep the plugins clear for everybody. So if we do a lot of magic in Maven, we don't like that. So we just want to be explicit. So you have to say, compile these classes. By default is everything. And you have to specify, I don't want to compile this one or just the rest.
Yeah. But the multi-release jar file is still also another problem.
Yeah.
If you want to create multi-release jars, it's not easy because you need both JDK somehow while compiling the whole stuff. Then you need something like 2 source folders. Then you need to set up the dependencies correctly because you need first compile the Java 8 or Java 7 part, and then you need something like a separate source folder for the Java 9 Java files that you need to compile. You also need to set the class path correct so you see all the other files while compiling that, and then you need to package it into one jar file, which is not so easy, I think. Is there support in Maven for that?
What we have a pattern for it.
Yeah.
That's what we call it, and it's based on a multi-module project, and it's I think already invented about 2 years ago. And it is a multi-module Maven project, and the good thing about it, it works with every IDE right now. So, and that was one of our requirements. And what it also does, if you specify, if you add unit tests, it is really running against that specific version of Java. Wow. So. That's good. Yes, I've seen other patterns, and that's the whole issue. They are not clean enough about that specific part. But the tricky part is in the end where you say, well, I want to combine everything again to a new jar.
Assembly plugin or something?
Yes,
like
we are
that?
using the assembly plugin
Okay.
and just shifting sources from this to the other location. It's not a clean solution, but it works. We have been thinking about a specific plugin to write it, but in the end, that plugin would be very, very powerful, and it will probably do more harm than good. So we're keeping this this pattern, and it works.
The question is, if the user community needs something like that, then we must be thinking of that. We are thinking already about that. But the point is, if you do such complex plugin, as Robert already said, it begins to become more complex to handle that from a build perspective, of the user perspective. There are many things which are already done behind the scenes, and that becomes more complex. And I'm not sure if that's a good idea to get that to the user out there. We have a pattern to solve that. It's not perfect, of course. The other question is, how many people are really needing these multi-release jars? And that's the point we can't answer at the moment. If you're in the situation that you need to do that, please ask on the mailing list. Then we have some feedback and see, okay, we need to do something and make it more simpler, more convenient for the users. Which might be at the moment, there is a solution that is not very convenient, but it works perfectly. If you need a more convenient solution, please ask on the mailing list. Say, yeah, it's better to do that and make a support for that. That's most important, to get some feedback from the users. We have some kind of view of how to work, but that might be very limited. We have a different point of view than you have, and we need to get the feedback. As Oracle has the same thing, we have the Maven developers have the same problem.
Ideally, you want, of course, everything in one Maven project. You don't want to have a multi-module project, but then that needs. But you have the separation of the tests, etc. So it probably requires a new architecture underneath Maven. So it's. I don't expect something to be supported soon.
It's a question of the users.
Yeah, sure. And we could use contributors. We're hiring contributors.
Good point.
Yeah, I guess so say we all in a sense. But I gotta say, I mean, the open source development really works well for the Java community because it lets us have these conversations in the open with people making these projects. So rather than sitting back and hoping that somebody's going to file a bug someday about a JDK, we can actually go out to these projects mailing lists and have discussions with the developers about the features they've tried out and found wanting improvement, the features they want, or the features they say, well, this may need a bit more time. Yes, please.
I have a question for Uwe.
Yeah.
Back in March, you were an opponent of the introduction of the permit illegal access command line option, and I would like to ask you what kind of alternative do you see? So if we wouldn't have the permit illegal access option enabled, how could we make Spring Hibernate work? So, because they use reflective access from code from the class stack to code on the module stack. Would there be a better alternative? Not, because I think the decision for Oracle was right in order to enable these frameworks to work and not to wait until they are modularized or they don't use reflection anymore.
I think I know the problem is it's because you want to have the stuff on the module path. So that theoretically, there are two things. The first thing is you might want to do reflection on something inside the JDK. I'm not sure if this affects Hibernate, for example, because it shouldn't really. I don't think it should do that at all. So that should not be the problem. Should not be really the problem. The problem is if you have a Hibernate jar in parallel to a module. That's your problem. But what you then can do is you can simply add opens to your module, and then the reflection would work. So if Hibernate would also be a module, you could say this is open to the Hibernate module. Or to the class path, if Hibernate is on the class path. And I think this is still supported it should be supported forever, I think. If you explicitly open something,
Yeah, I mean that's
for
part of the
reflection, yeah.
specification for
it's part of
most
the, so that would be in that case would be my recommendation to do that. But going into the JDK and reflecting on classes there is a bad idea. So I'm not sure if you want to serialize maybe Java lang string or something like that. I think for that case, I would have, if they are commonly used classes that you're serializing quite often, you should have some adapters doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's sometimes interesting, sometimes really weird use cases people have for this. For example, there is one popular build tool, which I won't mention, that in one of its incarnation was for performance reasons, basically digging out, you know, some internal JDK class, trying to get, I'm not sure what it was, I think it was processes running or something like that, to be able to start up daemons or whatever it was. And the thing is, the API from the operating system that the JDK provides is, right? The JDK provides actually gives you an unmodifiable collection because the operating system, by POSIX design, doesn't really let you change these things after you're running. But then, if it's a collection, you can still use set accessible to modify it, and so they did, right? And basically implemented their own kind of daemon layer on top of that hack. In those cases, it may be really hard, you know, to move off that practice unless there is an equivalent replacement in JDK for such functionality. And developing such functionality requires a lot more thought, you know, rather than just saying, well, shut it down. Don't do it. Because it may actually be useful for others as well, but then we need to actually think about the design implications, what the API should look like, what the security implications are, if it can be done in a cross-platform way, how it works on Windows, because everything is complicated on Windows, and so on, right? So there is real work behind those things.
Yeah. Nevertheless, I did never understood the requirement they had.
They wanted to go.
It was something with environment variables and spawning processes. Yeah. Because I think with a process builder, you can pass customized environment.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing they were really looking at after was the list of the environment variables defined for a process. Yeah. And then that's something that you can't or shouldn't be changing in POSIX after the fact because it's just an array in the operating system. And if you just write wildly into it, bad things will happen. Your application may crash. And so the JDK basically pulls that on startup and caches the information. And if you're trying then to use environment variables as a message passing mechanism, which you really shouldn't be doing, then of course that doesn't work. So you crack that open and yeah. Anyhow, don't do this at home, is what I'm saying.
I think the main problem here was also backwards compatibility, which is always something you see in a lot of open source projects. So they have to change code for Java 9 because it's impossible to do that in a specific in that way, like you have done it for 10 years ago, and then suddenly you also have maybe to change some public APIs in your tools where something like plugins require, and because of that you cannot really change that, and this is in most cases the reason where the problems start for those projects, because they cannot change the internal implementation because it's somehow visible to the outside. And based on that, they are stuck with some reflection hacks they were doing in the past.
Speaking of hacks, I mean, I guess a lot of these hacks may be, stemming from a golden age in the past when, getting access to things was easy and there were blogs or books around explaining all the cool things you could do if you only were using, I don't know, Sun, don't touch this to do this or that. Like, for example, a lot of people, a lot of projects tend to drag in code that then tries to use internal JPEG classes, is something I found. Com, Sun, JPEG, this or that. And this was a thing back in the Java 1.2 days. There's a class internal that does JPEG parsing. Let's just use that. And then around 2002, I think, or 2004, the Java imaging API came along, which provided a well-defined interface to do that stuff. But then you would have had to change your code, and then maybe you had users who were relying on Java 1.1, so, better stay with safe than sorry. And that code maybe didn't get changed until, say, today. Or the library may have no longer be as actively maintained as Maven or Lucene are. And so in those cases, it can be quite eye-opening to look at what sort of dependencies you may have that are effectively unmaintained. You may not notice it. And then the question there is, of course, do you really want to have code that you're relying on in production in your projects that is effectively unmaintained? That's all. I guess
That's also the thing that a lot of hacks you have seen outside, not only because there are newer APIs available, some stuff was using Sunmisk unsafe because there would be a speed up or something like that. In fact, in 1.4 or 1.3, there was a speed improvement by using Sunmisk unsafe, but Hotspot and the whole optimizer got so good that it optimizes all the overhead when you are accessing something like a byte buffer. It's optimizing that away, so there's no need to use Sunmisk unsafe. And the funny thing is, it often gets slower now if you run it with newer JDKs. So you just have to take the time and say, okay, I use the public APIs because it's better maintained. I don't need to hack that stuff. And it works. And for example, other stuff, which is an example, for example, the Groovy programming language. In its early days, the interesting thing is with Groovy, you can access every field and every method of every class, because it makes everything somehow public. Of course, it needs to call that accessible, and this is one reason why Groovy and also Gradle horribly fails with Java 9 and printing a lot of warnings when it starts up, because it's calling set accessible on every class it sees. So it calls it on every field and every method, on every class it sees, it calls set accessible true. And if you look into why they do this, the reason for that was, in something like Java 1.4 or 1.5, at that time, the check if something is public or private during reflection was very, very slow. And because of that, they said set accessible true. And because of that, there were no runtime checks anymore, and reflection was faster. That was the reason why they were doing that. And now you have the problem that everybody is writing Groovy scripts, accessing everything from the JDK, and you cannot switch that off anymore, because a lot of Groovy scripts will crash, because it won't find those private methods and all that stuff anymore. And that's one of the problems you have if you somehow a famous project, you have a large user base doing stuff, not even knowing that they're doing crazy, unsupported accesses to classes, and because of that, you are in some. You need to think about something, or you must live with a lot of warnings when you run your code on Java 9 at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have that.
Officially.
We just tell people not to do it. Right? Okay.
Except one question about the JMod and the JLink utility.
Yep.
In the JMod utility, you have an option for the Tata platform.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, on the JLink, you don't have.
Right.
The question is, first, I didn't find any documentation how the JMod Tata platform should be filled up, or what the values are, or valid values are. And the second point is, coming from that, does that mean that the JLink plugin is only linking for that platform on which it is running?
Okay, the latter one first. The JLink is linking for the platform it's running on. So
okay.
That's what it takes care of. And the first one, JMod, is sort of by design underdocumented. So JMod is basically our internal format we use in JDK 9 to mesh all these JDK modules together along with their native bits and pieces and so forth. And then JLink takes those JMod files and pulls the right bits together, basically. And so we, back in the days of Java 8 and so forth, or 7, 6, 5, we had this wonderful JDK structure with the JRE directory and the lib directory, and there were files everywhere, and a file called rt.jar, another file called tools.jar, and those weren't actually specified interfaces. Nevertheless, some people use them anyway, because why wouldn't you? It's there, right? So, I mean, come on, class path, add tools.jar from somewhere, make it work. And it worked, right? So, but the thing is, it also made sure that code ended up being in need for refactoring once we changed that structure in 9 to be able to create those, modular Java runtime images. You need to be able to pull things together and apart again. And so we wanted to avoid going through the same cycle again. So to avoid like having something that people rely on as in, oh, we'll write all these nice JMod hacks with this nice structure again, and then having to break all these hacks, in 18.3 or 9 or whatever the next release is that does major changes in this area. So JMod is kind of undocumented by design. That being said, I mean, those are the kind of questions that are really best served on Jigsaw-dev. We have many mailing lists in OpenJDK, and many of those are very active with people who are very interested in your feedback. So if you have questions about modules that we couldn't answer, and I'm sure you will have once you start playing with 9, please go subscribe to Jigsaw-dev on OpenJDK, and let us know about the feedback you have and the issues you have using 9 on your projects. And the same goes, of course, for all the other things we have been working on for the next revisions. So, for example, Mark has just proposed a first JEP to be included in 10. Coming from Project Ember. So for those of you who like JavaScript, var may be a thing, may not be a thing, that's coming in 10. But for that, make sure to let us know what you think on the corresponding lists in OpenJDK.